You're listening to Snowlight Wishes at Winterberry Lane, a cozy romance written by Cozy Romance Stories to bring warmth, comfort, and soft emotion to your bedtime or quiet moments. We'd love to know what you think. Please comment below and tell us how today's story touched your heart. And don't forget, we share 3 new stories every week, each one crafted to soothe, enchant, and help you drift gently into rest. Settle in, get comfortable, and enjoy tonight's tale. Snow always came to Evergreen like it had been personally invited. It didn't roar in or slam against windows like it did in the city. Here, it arrived on soft feet, drifting from a sky the color of pearl and lavender, taking its time to settle on rooftops and railings and the bare arms of maple trees lining Winterberry Lane. By the time the afternoon train from the city curved around the last hill and glided toward Evergreen Station, the town was already wrapped in a quiet, careful layer of white. James Rowan watched the snow slide past his window and tried, not very successfully, to unclench his jaw. The train car smelled faintly of wet wool, old coffee, and the lemon-scented cleaner they'd wiped the floors with. At some point in the last decade, passengers murmured in low voices. A child squealed a question somewhere behind him. Someone's phone chimed, then was quickly silenced. It was all harmless, ordinary noise, the kind his body should have tuned out. But after the past year in the city, his nerves reacted to everything, every buzz, every scrape, every small, meaningless demand. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and stared harder at the window. Fields rolled by, coated in frost. Leafless trees reached toward the sky like ink strokes on pale paper. The sun hid behind a creamy layer of cloud, and the flakes drifting down seemed to glow faintly as they fell in the distance. He could just make out the dark smudge of pine-covered hills. Home, his mind supplied. That word still felt strange. He left Evergreen determined to make something of himself, full of restless energy and grand plans. Art school, gallery work, city living, big ideas, big spaces, big chances. Now, 10 years later, he was coming back with a half-packed apartment, a gallery on the verge of closing, a portfolio of not quite what the market wants, and a head full of questions he couldn't seem to outrun. "You just need a reset," his boss had said gently, the last time they'd sat in the office going over numbers. "Get some distance, clear your head, figure out what you actually want. You've been grinding for so long, James. You're not a machine." He'd nodded because what else was there to do when the funding was drying up? And the one place he'd tried so hard to belong was quietly, politely showing him the door. Evergreen had seemed, in that moment, less like a destination and more like a default answer. The only place that made any sense when everything else stopped making sense. The intercom crackled. "Next stop, Evergreen Station. Evergreen in 5 minutes." His stomach did a little nervous twist, like it hadn't quite gotten the memo that this was supposed to be a peaceful retreat. He flexed his fingers in his gloves. feeling the faint stiffness in his knuckles from too many late nights hunched over sketches and keyboards. Calm down, he told himself. It's just home. It's just snow and old streets and people who remember you with ridiculous nicknames. And it's her, a quieter part of him whispered, entirely unhelpfully. He shut that part down, or tried to. The train slowed, wheels hissing softly under them. Buildings slid into view, the small brick station wrapped in evergreen garlands, the old clock tower, the row of shops on Winterberry Lane with wreaths hanging from their doors. Lampposts glowed warmly through the swirling snow, each halo of light catching the flakes as they spun. There was the sign, just as he remembered it, though the paint was fresher now. Welcome to Evergreen, where winter comes home. He huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. Little on the nose, don't you think? He murmured to himself. The train eased to a final gentle stop. People stood, pulling down bags and buttoning coats. James slung his satchel over his shoulder, grabbed his one suitcase, and joined the slow shuffle to the door. Cold hit him as soon as he stepped onto the platform, crisp and clean and edged, with the faint scent of pine and chimney smoke. The air felt real, like something he hadn't breathed in a very long time. Snow crunched under his boots. His breath fogged in a small white cloud in front of him. Across the platform, families clustered by the station doors. Hugs, kisses, kids jumping up and down as if they might actually take off. He just stood there for a moment, letting evergreen settle around him. It looked the same, but he didn't feel the same. Not by a long shot. He shook himself, shifted his grip on the suitcase, and started down the platform, head down against the light wind, which was, in retrospect, exactly the wrong time to round the corner. Someone collided with him so hard he let go of his suitcase handle and grabbed instinctively at whatever was flying toward him, which turned out to be an armful of books, a steaming paper cup, and a flurry of loose pages. "Oh, no, 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 no," a voice yelped. The cup went first, spinning in a sad arc before landing in a drift of snow, its contents steaming up in a tiny fog. The papers fanned out like startled birds, landing face down, right side up, some half buried, all definitely not where they were supposed to be. "I'm so sorry," James blurted, already crouching down. "I didn't see you." "Well, clearly," the other person snapped, and he heard the crunch of boots as they dropped to their knees, too. Note to self, evergreen platforms are now high-speed collision zones. He looked up then, ready to apologize again. The words stuck halfway up his throat. She was wrapped in a deep red coat, buttoned to her throat. Her hair pulled up into a messy bun that had lost its battle with the snow. Strands of dark brown hair curled around her face, catching flakes like little white stars. Her cheeks were pink from the cold and the impact both. She had that look he recognized from 1,000 commutes in the city, juggling too much, moving too fast. Absolutely not in the mood for a stranger making things worse. And her eyes, hazel, flecked with gold, were glaring at him over the rim of her glasses. "You could watch where you're going," she said, scooping up a damp page and wincing at the ink. "I said I'm sorry," he replied, a little more defensively than he meant to. "You came around the corner like you were trying to catch a train that was already leaving." "Because I'm on a schedule," she shot back. "Some of us have meetings and story time, and a stack of lesson plans to finalize before the town's entire under 12 population descends like confetti. He blinked. That's a very specific problem. It's my very specific life, she muttered, reaching for another page sailing past on the wind. Snow swirled faster around them as if it were curious. He reached out at the same time she did for a sheet half buried by his boot. His gloved hand brushed hers. There was the tiniest crackle, not painful, not sharp, just a flick of static or something like it. And for 1 second, the snowflake falling between them seemed to hang in the air. James stared at it. So did she. The tiny crystal hovered, turning lazily, refracting light in a way that looked almost intentional. Then it drifted down at last, landing in the margin of her page and melting into a perfect round droplet that sank into the paper without leaving a stain. They both stared. Did you, he began. Nope, she said immediately. Nope, it's just the cold and physics and I cannot afford to be magical and late. I think those are separate issues, he said, before his brain thought to stop his mouth. She shot him a look that would have withered a lesser man. You sound like you've had a good night's sleep and well-functioning boundaries. I don't want to hear it. He winced, then laughed in spite of himself. There was something familiar in her cadence, quick, sharp, humorous in a way that had warmth underneath, like a fire with a little extra snap in it. Let me help, he said softer. He gathered a small cluster of pages, careful not to smear the ink, and handed them to her. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice, then took them with a small sigh. Thank you. You're welcome, he said. Really, I am sorry. I just got in. I wasn't paying attention. Her gaze flicked up at that. You're just arriving? Yeah, he said, gesturing back vaguely toward the train. Back in town for a bit. The corners of her mouth tugged down like she was fighting with herself, not to say something that wanted very badly to be said. She looked at his face more closely this time. He felt the subtle shift in her scrutiny, the way her eyes moved, hair, eyes, jaw, mouth, as if comparing him to a version of someone she remembered. Wait, she breathed. Then, more slowly, James? He felt the name land in the space between them like a pebble in still water. His chest tightened. Deborah? Her expression did something complicated in half a second. Surprise, recognition, hope, hurt, irritation, all flickering through before she smoothed it over into something neutral. Oh, she said lightly. Too lightly. Well, that tracks. That tracks? He repeated, caught between a smile and a wince. Of course, she murmured, pressing the scattered papers into a slightly less chaotic stack. Of all the people I could crash into on a train platform, it would be you. He swallowed. Hi, Deb. No one had called her that out loud in years. Her eyes flickered. It's Deborah now, she said softly. At the library, the kids call me Miss Deborah. Miss Deb sounds like someone who hands out detention slips. He huffed out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh if it weren't weighed down with 10 years of unsent messages. Right. Sorry. Hi, Deborah. Silence stretched, full and fragile. Snow whispered down around them. landing on her hair, his shoulders, the pages between them. The station PA crackled faintly in the background. A kid zoomed by, dragging a rolling suitcase shaped like a penguin. He'd imagined this moment before in vague, harmless ways. Running into her at a cafe, maybe, saying something smooth and practiced. Explaining, apologizing, catching up. It had never involved spilled cocoa, flying papers, or her looking at him like he'd just stepped out of an old photograph she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. "You're back," she said. "Just for the holidays," he replied. "Maybe a little longer, depends." "On what?" she asked. He hesitated. "On whether it feels like, I can breathe here." Again, those words came out more honest than he'd meant them to. Her eyes softened almost involuntarily, then sharpened again, as though she'd caught herself caring too much, too fast. "Well," she said, shifting the stack in her arms, "Evergreen is very breathable. That part hasn't changed." "What about everything else?" he asked before he could stop the question. She tilted her head, studying him. "Some things change, some things don't." The way she said it pressed against something guilty inside him. His grip tightened on the handle of his suitcase. Deborah, A voice sang out over the noise of the platform. "There you are. I knew the snow wouldn't scare you off, my stubborn Christmas pine cone." James didn't have time to prepare before he was engulfed in a hug that smelled like sugar and cinnamon and orange zest. "Aunt Nellie," he managed, laughing into his great-aunt's shoulder. She pulled back, framing his face in flour-dusted mittens. Her gray curls escaped from under a knit hat shaped like a cupcake, complete with a red pom-pom cherry on top. "Look at you," she scolded affectionately. "Skinny as a snowflake and twice as fragile looking. City life hasn't been feeding you properly. I'll fix that in a week." "You say that like it's a threat," he said. "It is," she replied cheerfully. Then she caught sight of Deborah and lit up further. "Oh, and you found our brightest book light. Miss Lindale, have you been crashing into my nephew on purpose, or did the snow conspire with destiny?" Deborah flushed. "Pure accident, and possibly gravity, and his poor directional awareness." "It was mutual," James protested. "Her corners are dangerous." Nellie squinted at them, then at the scattered papers still sticking out at odd angles from Deborah's arms. That's how it starts. Papers and apologies and people pretending they're not glad to see each other." "Aunt Nellie," James muttered. Deborah shifted her weight. "I really do have to get to the library. Story hour doesn't wait, even for dramatic train reunions." "Library?" Nellie repeated. "Of course. You still making the story corner look like something out of a snow globe?" "I'm trying," Deborah said. "If the children don't riot—" "They'd never riot against you," Nellie said firmly. "Maybe against those dry chapter books, but never you." She leaned closer, dropping her voice just enough that James had to strain to hear. "You'll come by later? I have fresh rolls." "I'll try," Deborah said. "We're decorating the front display, and Mrs. Hallbrook gets territorial about the tinsel." "And you," Nellie said, turning her attention back to James, "are coming with me. The workshop key is in my pocket, potatoes are already boiling, and I refuse to let your first meal back in Evergreen be something from a vending machine." Yes, ma'am, he said automatically. Deborah made a small, strangled sound that might have been amusement. Their eyes met again for the briefest moment. For a heartbeat, there it was. The old familiarity, the echo of all those afternoons at the library table, carving projects spread out next to her notebooks, their conversations winding through books and dreams, and someday, then it was gone. I should go, she said softly. Yeah, he replied. Yeah, me too. A dozen things crowded his tongue. I'm sorry, I wanted to call. I didn't know how to talk about grief. I didn't know how to stay. None of them made it past his lips. She adjusted her grip on her papers, shoulders straightening, the professional calm sliding over her like a coat. Welcome back, James. Thanks, he said. It's good to see you. She gave the smallest nod, the kind that said she'd heard him but wasn't sure what to do with it. Then she turned and walked away, boots crunching, her figure swallowed slowly by the soft veil of falling snow. He watched her go, chest tight. She looks good, Nellie said matter-of-factly, following his gaze. Tired maybe, but that girl always did carry the weight of worlds in her pockets. He swallowed. She's different. She's older, Nellie said. And so are you. Don't expect to walk in and find your younger selves waiting where you left them. He huffed out a breath. You always did go straight for the point. Someone has to, she said, looping her arm through his. Come along. The workshop's been sulking without you. I swear the wood creaks differently when it misses its carver. As they walked down the platform, a gust of wind pushed a swirl of snow around their ankles. For a second, James could have sworn the flakes danced in a small circle around him, then drifted after Deborah as she disappeared around the corner. He blinked, then shook his head. Evergreen always did have a flair for dramatics, he muttered. What was that? Nellie asked. Nothing, he said. Just getting used to being home. They stepped out onto the street. Winterberry Lane opened up before them, all garlands and wreaths and softly glowing storefronts. The bakery's front window was fogged with warmth, silhouettes moving behind trays of something that smelled like heaven. The little bookshop James remembered from childhood had been painted a brighter color, but the crooked sign was the same. Fresh snow crunched under their boots, clean and new. His shoulders dropped a fraction. His heartbeat slowed. He might have imagined it, but as he and Nellie turned toward the narrow lane that led to his grandmother's old workshop, the lamppost nearest them flickered once, brighter, then settled into a steady glow. A single snowflake drifted down and landed on the back of his gloved hand. It didn't melt right away. He watched it resting there, perfect and intricate, each tiny branch gleaming in the lamp's golden light. For a breath or two, it was as if time had paused to let him admire the pattern. Then, gently, it softened into a cool droplet that sank into the dark fabric. You see that? He asked before he thought better of it. Nellie hummed. See what? That flake, it just... He broke off. Trying to explain that a snowflake had behaved oddly felt like maybe not the best way to reassure anyone of his mental stability. She patted his arm. Evergreen's happy you're back, that's all. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and decided not to argue with whatever logic that was. As they walked on, he thought of Deborah's face when she'd realized it was him. The way her eyes had softened and hardened all at once. The way she'd said his name like something she couldn't quite swallow. Just for a moment, the idea of being back in Evergreen, of wrestling with the past, and all the unfinished conversations he'd abandoned, felt heavier than his suitcase. But then they turned the corner, and there it was. The workshop, small, a little worn at the edges, but still standing. Snow rested on its sloped roof, and icicles clung like glass teeth along the edge of the awning. The green-painted sign above the window carved years ago still read, Rowan Woodcraft, Hand-Carved Wonders. The words were faded. The wood was weathered. But the curves of the letters, the little flourish on the R that his grandmother had insisted on, it was all the same. James stopped on the path and just looked. He could almost hear her humming under her breath, smell the lemon oil and sawdust, feel the weight of a carving knife in his hand as her voice guided his. "What are you waiting for?" Nellie asked, squeezing his arm. "Doors don't open themselves." "Don't they?" he murmured, thinking of hovering snowflakes and flickering lights. She laughed. "Not even in Evergreen, dear heart. You still have to turn the key." She pressed the small brass key into his palm. It was warm, from her hand or his imagination, he wasn't sure. He stepped forward, fitted it into the lock, and turned. The tumblers clicked with a sound that was unexpectedly emotional. When he pushed the door open, the smell hit him first. Stale, yes, with dust and time, but underneath that, deeper, the ghost of pine and varnish, and something sweet. It was like stepping into a memory preserved under glass. Light from the street lamp spilled in, catching on motes of dust that danced in the air like tiny disorganized stars. The workbench stood where it always had, tools neatly arranged the last time someone had cared enough to put them away. Shelves lined the walls, some empty, some still holding small, unfinished pieces. A thin layer of dust softened every edge. His throat tightened. "It's been waiting for you," Nellie said again. Softer this time. He stepped inside. The floor creaked in familiar places. His fingers brushed the back of a chair, the corner of the workbench, the edge of a shelf. Everywhere his hand passed stirred up memories that floated like dust. The sound of his grandmother's laugh, the scrape of sandpaper, the quiet presence of someone who had always believed in him. Now apparently it was his turn to believe in something again. He let his suitcase drop gently just inside the door and turned back to look out the window. From here he could see a slice of Winterberry Lane, the glow from the bakery down the street, the soft fall of snow over the square. If he squinted, he could almost imagine he saw a flash of red coat disappearing around a corner, pages tucked securely under one arm. Deborah Lindale was back in his world. Evergreen was snow-dusted and softly humming, with its own brand of Christmas magic. And for better or worse, he was here. Home. The thought didn't quite fit yet, not snugly. But as a wind curled around the eaves and snow tapped gently at the window, some small part of him loosened its grip on the fear and let a thread of possibility in. Outside, the lamppost flickered once more. Inside, on a high shelf he hadn't noticed yet, A small wooden ornament his grandmother had carved long ago, a lantern with a tiny carved flame, caught the light and seemed, for just a heartbeat, to glow on its own. James didn't see it, but Evergreen did. And somewhere across town, in a quiet room above the library, a lantern in Deborah's bag flickered in sympathy, its soft heart of light fluttering once at the exact moment she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if I can do this again." The snow kept falling slow and steady. The story had only just begun. The next morning dawned pale gold, a light so soft it felt like it had been brushed across Evergreen with a watercolor wash. Snow glistened on rooftops, turning houses into frosted gingerbread silhouettes. Chimneys puffed gentle plumes into the cold air. And down Winterberry Lane, the sound of distant laughter drifted like a warm ribbon through the chill. Deborah stirred awake in her small attic bedroom above the library, blinking at the snow-dappled light spilling through her curtains. For a long moment she lay still, cocooned in blankets, letting the quiet sink into her bones. But quiet wasn't enough to keep her mind from returning again to the train platform. James Rowan, back in Evergreen, back in her orbit, back in the spaces that had once mattered more than she let herself admit. She sighed and pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes. "You're fine," she whispered to no one, her breath fogging faintly in the cold air of the room. "It's just a person. You knew lots of people in the past. This one is just one of them." Except he wasn't just one of them. James had been a constant thread through her teenage years, her library partner, her quiet confidant, her almost something that never fully bloomed. And then he disappeared. No explanation, no closure, just gone. Her heart had learned to fold that hurt into a paper crane and tuck it away on a high shelf. But yesterday, seeing him again, had brushed dust off the wings. She groaned softly and sat up, hugging her knees beneath the quilts. The lantern Lila had set on the library desk last week glimmered faintly on her dresser across the room. Soft gold, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Don't start," she muttered to it. The lantern shimmered once, as if pretending it had no idea what she meant. Meanwhile, James stood in the doorway of the workshop, a steaming mug of coffee between his hands, watching the morning unfold. Winterberry Lane stretched out before him, still quiet, still dusted with fresh snow. He could hear the faint sounds of Nellie bustling in her kitchen across the yard. Pots clinking, flour being sifted. The occasional startling thump that meant she dropped something and then immediately declared it absolutely fine. The workshop smelled like lemon oil and fresh pine, the scents beginning to wake up as he warmed the place. His grandmother's tools hung neatly on the pegboard wall. Some were worn smooth from years of use. Others looked almost new. All of them pulled threads of memory through him as gently as wind pulls at a curtain. He'd spent hours the previous night just being there, sitting on the old stool, hands curled around a mug, breathing in the familiar air, letting time catch up to him. But even in the comfort of that space, his thoughts had drifted again and again to Deborah. The startled look in her eyes when she recognized him, the cautious warmth in her voice when she said his name, the tiny, almost invisible flicker of vulnerability she'd quickly swallowed. God, he'd missed her, and he'd lost the right to have missed her. The mug warmed his fingers as he leaned against the door frame. Snowflakes floated lazily down from the pale sky, catching in his hair. He took a slow breath, letting the cold sting his lungs. He wasn't sure what he wanted from Evergreen. Not yet. And he definitely wasn't sure what he hoped or feared when it came to Deborah. But the one thing he was certain of, he didn't want to mess up again. Evergreen awakened in stages, unfolding like a gentle morning hymn. Children darted past with sleds. Shopkeepers swept their snowy stoops. Mrs. Donnelly hung fresh garlands outside the antique shop and waved at every passerby like she'd been waiting for them. Specifically, a group of teenagers practiced carols on the corner, their voices chiming like bells, slightly out of tune in the sweetest possible way. By the time Deborah stepped out of the library mid-morning, the whole lane was alive with soft energy. She pulled her scarf tighter and tucked a stack of books under one arm. "Morning, Miss Deborah," called a little girl pulling a bright purple sled. "Good morning, Hazel," Deborah called back with a genuine smile. She loved this part of the job, being the familiar, steady part of the town's heartbeat. Evergreen was a place where routine and comfort held hands, and she was proud to be part of that. She had just reached the bottom of the steps when Clara Lindale, her older sister, appeared like a whirlwind in a puff of snow. "Good, you're up," Clara announced, grabbing Deborah by the elbow. "I've been up for hours," Deborah said. "Some of us actually have morning responsibilities." Clara waved a mitten dismissively. "Details. Listen, I heard through the peppermint grapevine," meaning Nellie. "Oh no," Deborah groaned, "that James arrived yesterday." Deborah lifted her chin. "Yes, he did." "And you ran into him?" "It happens. It's a small platform. And you looked like someone dropped a snowball down your coat afterward." Deborah inhaled sharply. "Clara?" Clara softened instantly, the teasing melting from her eyes. "Hey? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Deborah lied. Clara studied her face, then exhaled. "That man always meant more to you than you let on. That's ancient history. Ancient history doesn't hit you like a sleigh in the face," Clara said softly. "Deb, you two had something, maybe not a name, or a shape, or a plan, but something." Deborah swallowed. "And then he left." Her sister nodded, sympathetic but not pitying. "And now he's back. And I don't know what to do with that," Deborah admitted in a small voice. Clara squeezed her arm. "You don't have to do anything today. Just breathe. Let the story unfold." "I'm not ready for a story," Deborah muttered. "Evergreen doesn't care what you're ready for," Clara said with a wink. "It only cares what you need." With that, she gave Deborah a last hug and bustled off to the bakery, leaving her standing in the falling snow, cheeks warm, heart unsettled. Across town, James found himself unable to stay put. Maybe it was the lingering restlessness from the city. Maybe it was the workshop's too familiar quiet. Maybe it was the hope that somehow Evergreen itself would point him toward understanding what he was supposed to do next. Or maybe, if he were honest, it was the memory of Deborah's eyes, softening for a split second before she buried them behind cool distance. So he walked. Each step crunched softly through the snow. Houses wore wreaths and bows. Little bells tinkled on door handles as people came and went from shops. The smell of cinnamon drifted from the bakery, drawing him like a magnet. He passed the town square and stopped. The great evergreen tree stood tall and proud, its branches reaching wide and steady, dusted in fresh snow. It waited patiently at the center of the square, like a sentinel or a witness, or maybe even a keeper of old promises. Something about it tugged at him. A boy he used to be had once stood beneath this tree with a girl whose laughter spilled like light between the branches. They'd shared secrets and stories and hopes that felt too big for their small-town selves. He shook the memory away, but the tree didn't let go so easily. Its branches shimmered with snow that caught the light in impossible ways. For one strange moment, he thought the tree glowed, just faintly, just around the edges. Then someone called his name. He turned. Marcus Pinewell, Evergreen's mayor, self-declared holiday enthusiast, and wearer of possibly the most enthusiastic scarf in North America, hurried over, clipboard in hand. "James, you're back." "Seems that way," James said with a faint smile. "Oh, this is perfect timing," Marcus said. "We're desperately short-staffed for the Christmas Day festival setup." The children's story area, the lantern walkway, the craft booth, everything. And guess who's in charge of organizing the story corner? James bit back a smile. "Deborah." Marcus nodded emphatically. "She's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But when it comes to spatial planning, she's a danger to herself and others. Last year, she put the music stand in the cocoa spill zone. A hazard, a tragedy, a sticky mess." James chuckled. So, what does that have to do with me?" Marcus pointed at him with the earnestness of a man who thought he was being subtle. "You're handy, you're creative, and you know Deborah. You two can work together." James's heart stumbled. "Work together?" "Yes." Marcus beamed. "The town needs you two." Then he added quietly, but not quietly enough, "And maybe you need each other again, too." James stood there, breath misting, chest tight. He could feel Evergreen watching him. The snow, the lanterns, the tree, everything humming with gentle insistence. "Think about it," Marcus said, waving his clipboard. "And stop by the library this afternoon if you can. I'm sure Deborah will be thrilled." He hurried off, scarf flapping wildly behind him. James breathed in deeply, the cold hitting too many parts of him at once. "Work with Deborah," he repeated under his breath. He wasn't sure if the idea made him want to laugh, panic, or run. But another feeling, quieter, deeper, rose beneath it. Hope. A small, trembling hope that maybe this was his chance to fix something he'd broken long ago. He stood for a long time in the snow, watching the lanterns flicker, The tree hummed softly, and the world around him breathed. Then he turned toward the library, not because Marcus asked, but because something inside him whispered, "You owe her the truth. You owe yourself the chance. Go." Evergreen's library had always been a kind of sanctuary, a place with thick wooden shelves that held both stories and silence in perfect balance, where the winter light made cozy pools on the carpet and the radiators hissed softly, like they were whispering secrets. Deborah had loved this place since she was 8 years old, back when she hid behind the fairy tale section to avoid the chaos of holiday crowds. Now she was the one creating order there. She had keys, duties, routines, control. Control kept her safe. But the moment she stepped inside that morning and hung her coat by the front desk, she felt a thread of unease tug at her ribs. Like the building itself somehow knew things were shifting in her life again. She shook it off and walked toward the children's section. Snow-filtered light spilled in through the tall front windows, illuminating the tiny chairs and story mats she'd arranged the day before. Glittering paper snowflakes, hand-cut by last week's craft club, dangled from the ceiling like a constellation of crooked stars. She knelt to straighten the corner of the blue reading rug, but her thoughts kept drifting. James, the way he'd looked at her yesterday, the way his voice cracked almost imperceptibly when he said her name, the guilt she saw there, the apology he hadn't spoken yet but carried in every breath, and the way her own chest had responded before she managed to shut it down. She sat back on her heels, pressing a hand to her sternum. "I'm fine," she whispered to the empty library. The second-floor radiator let out a sympathetic rattle, which she chose not to interpret. She stood, brushing snow dust from her coat, and moved toward the circulation desk to check her notes for the week. Her fingers brushed past the lantern Lila had brought. Its glow dimmed for now, but still warm, still attentive. "Not today." She muttered at it as if it were being too nosy. The lantern pulsed once, very slightly. She ignored it completely, which was more effort than she'd admit. Down Winterberry Lane, James stood outside the library, heart thudding louder than it had any right to. He held a rolled-up set of diagrams, a few sketches of ideas for the festival setup that he'd worked on late into the night. The workshop had felt good familiar, steadying, but everything about being back in Evergreen felt heavier when Deborah was somewhere nearby. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold air sting his lungs. This is just a conversation, he told himself. Just a work meeting, just a project, just the woman whose absence had shaped entire years of your life. He rolled his eyes at himself and took a step up the library stairs. Inside, the bell over the door chimed softly. Deborah looked up, and in that moment, time thinned to a fragile strand between them. She stilled. His breath caught. For a heartbeat, he could almost feel the years shrink, leaving only familiarity and longing and an ache he hadn't known how to name back then. Then her expression shifted, shutters sliding quietly into place. "Morning." she said softly, polite and distant. Morning, he echoed. He forced his voice into a steadier register. Marcus said you might need help with the festival layout. Deborah sighed, her shoulders dropping just a little. I do. I absolutely do. But I'm warning you, I'm hopeless with space planning. I keep trying to make the story corner both cozy and big enough, and it ends up being neither. That's why I brought this, he said, unrolling the papers. Her eyes flickered with cautious curiosity. He laid out a detailed sketch. Lantern-lined paths and child-friendly seating arcs, a backdrop that offered beautiful sight lines of the great evergreen tree. Deborah's lips parted slightly. James, this is really good. His chest warmed. Thanks. I wasn't sure what would work best, so I made a few variations. She brushed her fingertips over one drawing, slow and thoughtful, her nails catching lightly on the paper's texture. The simple action hit him with a wave of memory. Nights when she'd traced the edges of his sketches in high school, offering praise so quiet but so sincere that he carried it for days, like a talisman. She caught him watching and straightened. We should look at the space in person. Make sure the measurements match what Marcus gave us. Right, he said. Should we go now? Her hesitation was small, is barely a flicker, but real. And it hurt. He tucked the hurt away, swallowing it gently. Deborah nodded. Let me grab my notebook. As she walked behind the counter, her sister Jo slipped into the library out of nowhere like a mischievous snow sprite. Oh, Jo whispered dramatically, leaning in next to James. Look at you. Tall, broody, repentant looking. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were here to break my sister's heart again. James froze, eyes widening. Jo grinned and slapped him lightly on the arm. Relax, I'm kidding. Mostly. He exhaled a strangled noise of half laugh and half terror. Nice to see you too. You back to stay? She asked casually. I don't know yet, he admitted. Jo sobered, surprisingly quickly. Well, she took your leaving hard, you know. James swallowed. I know. You're not a villain, Jo said quietly. You're just a chapter she closed before she was ready. Then she winked and flounced away, just as Deborah returned, notebook in hand. Ready? Deborah asked, breathlessly unaware of the emotional landmines that had just detonated beside her. James cleared his throat. Whenever you are. Outside, the snow was falling in a softer pattern now. Gentle, drifting tufts that caught in Deborah's hair as they walked to the town square. James forced himself not to stare, but it was like the snow was drawn to her. Her breath clouded the air. Her boots left neat prints beside his. The lantern on the library's desk pulsed once as they left. Unseen but felt. They walked in a silence that wasn't truly uncomfortable, but wasn't easy either. Deborah gloved her hands tightly around her notebook. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, but her pace never faltered. James tucked the rolled sketches under his arm, trying to mirror a steadiness he wasn't fully feeling. When they reached the great evergreen tree, something in the air shifted. The tree towered above them, impossibly grand with its sweeping branches and snow-laden needles. If a tree could cradle stories, this one surely did. Hundreds of wishes, made over decades, seemed to hover under its winter canopy. The magic was subtle, but it was there. James inhaled slowly. "Still beautiful," he murmured. Deborah nodded, her breath visible in the cold. "It always takes my breath away, even after all these years." A moment of quiet wonder settled between them. Then Marcus appeared, materializing like a snow-covered whirlwind. "Oh, thank goodness," he cried. "The dynamic duo, my angels, my saviors, my only hope." James blinked. "We're a duo?" Deborah closed her eyes. "Please stop calling us that." Marcus ignored both of them. "Look at this disaster!" He flung his arm toward the half-assembled story corner in dramatic despair. It was not exactly a disaster, but it wasn't good either. The seating was too widely spaced. The lantern posts were in awkward places. The story bench was angled incorrectly. The space felt more like a strange, festive waiting room than a magical reading nook. Deborah winced. "I told you I don't have spatial logic." "It's a gift," Marcus said dramatically. "And you, darling, were blessed with many gifts. Just not that one." James hid a smile. Deborah elbowed him lightly before he could enjoy it too much. "Okay," James said, stepping into the snow-dusted space, unfolding the first sketch. "Let's start with the path. I think the lanterns should guide the children in a gentle curve, not a straight line. More inviting." Deborah tilted her head. "Like a story unfolding instead of a hallway?" His chest warmed. "Exactly." Marcus clapped. See? See? I told you he'd understand." Deborah flushed faintly and pretended to write something in her notebook that didn't need to be written. James paced slowly through the snow, measuring with long steps, marking imaginary arcs with his gloved hands. Deborah followed, shivering occasionally, biting her lip in concentration. He noticed every small thing. When she tucked her hair back with a soft, nervous flick. When she pushed her glasses up with her knuckle. When she frowned at a measurement, her brows knitting in that old familiar way. And she noticed things too, though she didn't want to admit it. The way he measured carefully, not rushing. The way he asked her thoughts instead of assuming. The way he carried that old gentleness in his voice, layered now with something deeper. The way he glanced at her, not constantly but with meaning, like he was memorizing something fragile. At one point, she tripped slightly on a buried branch under the snow. James reached out instinctively, steadying her by the elbow. Her breath hitched. His hand lingered 1 second too long. She straightened quickly. "Thank you." "Anytime," he murmured. And there it was, the spark. Small, quiet, barely there, but real. Marcus, oblivious or pretending to be, kept flipping through his clipboard. After an hour of collaboration, quiet discussions, shared looks, laughter she tried not to enjoy too much, the story corner began to look like something magical. Something warm? Something hopeful? Marcus wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. It's beautiful. I could kiss both of you. Please don't, Deborah pleaded. No kissing, James agreed. Marcus scampered off to fetch Coco, leaving them in the quiet again, snow swirling gently. Deborah hugged her notebook to her chest. This helped. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without this layout. You would have figured it out, he said softly. You always do. She looked at him, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. A memory, a question, a tremble of possibility. But the walls around her heart held firm. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe not. He hesitated. Deborah, I need to say something. She stiffened slightly. James, not everything, he said quickly. Just, I'm glad we're working together. I'm glad we're talking. I didn't expect it. And I know you're cautious. I know I earned that. But I want to take this slowly. You set the pace. The vulnerability in his voice was so real it made her chest ache. She swallowed. Slowly, she echoed. Their breaths clouded the air together. Snow drifted around them in small spirals. The great tree shimmered faintly above. Evergreen seemed to lean closer. Finally, she nodded. A small, careful nod. But a nod. Okay, she said softly, slowly. James exhaled, relief threading through his breath like warmth. She turned before anything else could be said. I should get back to the library. Let me walk you, he said. She hesitated, then nodded again. They walked the path back to the library together, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders almost brushed whenever the wind shifted. By the time afternoon light faded to lavender, evergreen shimmered like a snow globe, winding into evening. Lanterns were beginning to blink awake along Winterberry Lane, their soft glows stretching outward through drifting flakes. Shop windows steamed warmly. Children's laughter echoed in little bursts before dissolving into the chilled air. It was a picturesque calm that usually soothed Deborah. Usually, today she could not settle. The moment she stepped back inside the library after walking with James, her pulse refused to slow. Every familiar sound, the soft hum of the radiator, the distant clatter of Mrs. Holbrook shelving books upstairs, the quiet rustle of pages, felt too amplified, too layered with thoughts she didn't want. Thoughts of him, his voice saying, "You set the pace." His eyes, gentle, guilty, hopeful. His hand on her elbow. His breath clouding the air beside hers. His sincerity, his quietness, his presence. Deborah pressed her palm against the front desk, grounding herself. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. "It's just a project," she whispered. "It's just helping, that's all." But her heart didn't believe it. The lantern on her desk flickered once, as if disagreeing. She glared at it. "Stay out of this." It pulsed again, innocent like eyelashes blinking. Before she could pick a new argument with an inanimate object, the library door flew open, letting in a swirl of cold air, and a flustered 12-year-old girl with pigtails flying in two opposite directions. "Miss Deborah," she cried, breathless. "It's an emergency." Deborah's stomach flopped. What happened? "It's Grandma Donnelly," the girl squeaked. "What happened to her?" Deborah asked, fear tightening her voice. She... "Breathe, sweetheart," Deborah said, kneeling slightly so her voice was level and steady. The girl took a huge gulp of air. "She needs help. For the festival, she's trying to finish the wooden signs for the booth displays, but she says she can't do the lettering without her good glasses, and she lost her good glasses, and she's crying over the paintbrush water because she thought it was her tea, and she drank it." Deborah blinked. "She drank her paint water?" "Yes." The girl flung her arms dramatically. "She thought it was chamomile. It wasn't poisonous or anything, but she's freaking out because she says the signs look like chicken scratch on a barn door." Deborah bit her lip to keep from smiling. That was absolutely something Mrs. Donnelly would say. "Okay," Deborah said gently. "Okay, we'll fix this." "We?" the girl repeated, brightening. "Yes," Deborah said. And even as she said it, she already knew who "we" needed to mean. James. This was a woodworking problem, a lettering and painting problem, a collaboration problem, a problem that required two people who hadn't fully figured out how to exist in the same space without emotional static. Wonderful. Deborah straightened, sighed at the ceiling, ignored the lantern's triumphant glow, and reached for her coat. "Let's go," she said. "Show me where she is." James was sweeping the floor of the workshop, humming under his breath and feeling, if he were honest, lighter than he had in years. It wasn't relief exactly, but space, a little emptiness inside him that wasn't hollow but waiting for what he wasn't ready to say. He replayed every moment with Deborah earlier that day. Her kindness, her cautiousness, her small, reluctant laughs. Her final word, slowly, slowly, was something he could do. Slowly he understood. Slowly he deserved. He was about to start organizing the shelves when a knock startled him. He opened the door to find Deborah, flushed, breathless, snow-dusted, and a little girl who bounced on her toes like she was powered by pure sugar. "James," Deborah said, a bit breathless, "we need help." "We." The word hit him right in the ribs. He tried not to smile. "What's going on?" The girl burst into speech before Deborah could. "It's my grandma, and she can't see. And she drank paint water, and she said the signs look like barn chickens wearing lipstick and..." Deborah placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "What Harper means is we need someone skilled with woodworking and lettering and possibly soothing panicked grandmothers." James blinked. "Mrs. Donnelly needs help?" "Oh, yes," Deborah said with a wince. And that was all it took. He grabbed his jacket. "Lead the way." Mrs. Donnelly's house sat like a cheerful gingerbread cottage near the end of the lane, warm light spilling from its windows, smoke curling from the chimney. But the moment they approached the porch, they could hear the crisis inside. "I ruined it," Mrs. Donnelly wailed. Harper face-palmed dramatically. "She's been like this for over an hour." Deborah knocked lightly. "It's just us," she called. "Deborah and Harper and James." The door flew open. Mrs. Donnelly, in a knitted sweater that looked like it had been attacked by peppermint stripes, stared out at them through her regular glasses, eyes wide with theatrical despair. "Don't come in," she said gravely. "It's too late. My artistic reputation is in the grave." James stepped forward gently. "Mind if we take a look anyway?" Mrs. Donnelly hesitated, then stepped aside with a huff. "Oh, come in then. But don't say I didn't warn you." The living room looked like a craft tornado had hit it. Bowls of paint water, open jars of glitter, wooden signs scattered everywhere. And true to Harper's report, one mug of paint water sat suspiciously empty. Deborah whispered, "She actually drank it." James whispered back, "She'll be fine." "Probably." Mrs. Donnelly pointed dramatically at the wooden signs on the table. "Look at this travesty, James Rowan. I tried to write Cocoa Station, but it looks like Cocoa Stain. Like some kind of caffeinated crime scene." James bit his lip to keep from laughing sympathetically. "Let's see what we can salvage," he said. He rolled up his sleeves and stepped toward the table. Deborah drew closer too, brushing snow from her coat. They stood so near that her shoulder brushed his. Lightly, briefly, but enough to jolt warmth through him. She noticed. He saw the quick intake of breath. But she didn't step away. Instead, she said softly, "You take the lettering. I'll sand and repaint the background." He nodded. "We make a good team." Her cheeks warmed ever so slightly. And they began. For the next hour, the house filled with the soft sounds of brush strokes and careful sanding. Mrs. Donnelly hovered, offering unhelpful commentary. Harper chattered, asking James a million rapid-fire questions about carving and sanding and whether it was possible to carve a life-sized horse using only one giant log. "Technically, yes," James said, "but you'd need a crane." Harper gasped, "I love cranes." Deborah laughed, a sound so warm and sudden it made James look up. She caught him watching. Her smile faltered, but didn't fully vanish. She returned to painting. James returned to lettering. It felt peaceful, easy, like something they had done 1,000 times. And indeed, they had grown up working on school projects together. Posters, decorations, theater sets, snowflake murals, late-night crafting disasters before the winter pageants. Those memories hung around them now like soft winter lights, familiar and gentle. At one point, she exhaled carefully and blew a stray wisp of hair from her face. Without thinking, James reached out and tucked it behind her ear. Her breath stilled. His pulse jumped. Their eyes locked. Something hovered between them, quiet, fragile, more felt than seen. But before anything else could unfold, Mrs. Donnelly gasped dramatically. "It's beautiful," she cried, holding up a finished sign. Deborah jumped slightly and stepped back. James cleared his throat, ears warming. They worked a bit longer. Finishing touches, glitter accents, corrections to lettering, until all 5 signs sat on the table, drying in neat rows. Mrs. Donnelly clutched her chest. "You two have saved Christmas." Harper threw her arms in the air. "I told you so." James and Deborah shared a look. A tiny smile flickered at the corner of her mouth, one she didn't hide this time. "Well," James said softly, "we saved at least the signage." Deborah's eyes sparkled faintly. "Small victories count." As they stepped back outside into the evening, the sky had deepened to soft violet. Snow fell gently, whispering against their coats. Lantern light washed the lane in gold. They stood for a moment in the quiet, just standing, just breathing, just existing near each other in a way that felt new and old at the same time. James exhaled. "Today was good." Deborah nodded slowly. "Yes, it was." They didn't touch, they didn't move closer, but the space between them felt different now. Thinner, warmer, woven with something they both understood but neither dared to name. "Finally," she said, "we should get these sketches finalized tomorrow." He nodded. "I'll come by the library." She hesitated. "Okay." "Okay," he echoed. She turned to leave, snow gathering on her scarf, her figure glowing in the lantern light. He watched her for a moment longer than he meant to, and from somewhere, high above or deep below, or perhaps from within the very snowflakes themselves, a faint shimmer passed through the air. Soft, warm, hopeful, evergreen sighed in contentment. The thaw had begun. Evergreen snow deepened overnight, falling steadily until every roof and branch wore a soft white quilt. Morning arrived slowly, the sky diffusing through pale clouds, painting the world in muted shades of pearl and rose. It was the kind of morning people stayed curled in bed. The kind of morning fireplaces crackled earlier than usual. The kind of morning evergreen breathed warmth into the cold. The kind of morning Deborah normally loved. But today, she woke with a strange heaviness sitting behind her ribs. Not exactly sadness, but something restless, uncertain, something unsettled. As she sat at her little kitchen table above the library, stirring peppermint tea she didn't really want, memories of the night before replayed softly. James's hand brushing that piece of hair off her cheek. The startled stillness that bloomed between them. The warmth in his eyes, sincere, unguarded. The way her breath had caught before she quickly looked away, and the way her heart had reacted. Traitorous and hopeful. She pushed the memory down until it quieted. It didn't go away, but it sank deeper into the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to examine. The lantern on her dresser flickered once. She glared at it. "It was nothing," she muttered. The lantern pulsed invisible skepticism. Meanwhile, James was pacing the workshop, He had been pacing for 20 minutes. He'd woken early, made coffee, organized tools, reorganized tools, wiped the bench twice, and still couldn't shake the fluttery tension winding through him. His mind wouldn't stop replaying one moment, her breath brushing his knuckles when he tucked her hair back, her eyes widening, her soft gasp, surprised, nervous, yearning, confused. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You're getting ahead of yourself," he whispered. But some fragile piece inside him whispered back. She didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, breathed slowly, and told himself, for the 100th time, that the past wasn't something a single moment could rewrite. Deborah had every reason to guard herself from him. The last thing he wanted was to move too fast or misunderstand her again. He needed to take it slow. Today he would simply go to the library, work on the layout, be calm, be steady, be someone she could trust. He grabbed the updated sketches and stepped into the snowy morning. Deborah was shelving a stack of Wintertale picture books when he entered the library, the bell chiming in its soft, familiar way. The moment she heard it, her shoulders stiffened, just a touch, but she didn't turn. James recognized that tension. The "I'm steady, I'm fine, I'm in control" tension. Her voice came out a little too composed as she said, "You're right on time." He smiled gently. "I try." She finally turned, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that didn't feel casual at all. "Let's look at the sketches so we can finalize them." No warmth, no lingering glances, no tiny smile like last night. Just business. James swallowed and nodded. "Sure." They walked to the study table near the tall front window. Snow floated down outside, soft and magical. The lantern on the front desk glowed faintly, like it had been waiting for something. James spread out the sketches. She leaned over the table, posture too straight, too guarded. "I adjusted the lantern arcs," he said. "I thought moving the benches closer might—" "I think it's fine," she interrupted. He blinked. "You think it's what? Fine?" "It doesn't need adjusting," she said quickly. "Oh, okay." He tried to keep his tone neutral. "I just thought the curve might guide the children better." "It doesn't matter," she said, flipping pages too fast. "Everything you do is good. It's all good." Her words, meant as praise, landed oddly. Not warm, not open, rushed. Nervous. He watched her for a moment, noticing the way she avoided his eyes. Last night had affected her, more than she wanted to admit. But instead of softening, she was bracing. A small ache settled in his chest. He cleared his throat. "Deborah, did something happen? Did I do something wrong?" Her shoulders tightened further. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." She picked up a book from the nearest stack and straightened it repeatedly, aligning the edges even though they were already perfectly aligned. "You're different today," he said softly. "I'm fine," she echoed. They both knew she wasn't. He hesitated. "If I crossed a line last night—" "You didn't?" she interrupted sharply, too sharply. Silence hung between them. fragile and cold. She drew a slow breath. I just don't want to send the wrong signals. Or if you think that we're what? He asked gently. She flinched at the softness in his voice. Because softness meant possibility, and possibility meant danger. James, she said, keeping her tone controlled, I don't want you to think that just because we're working on this or helping Mrs. Donnelly or yesterday's moment, she rushed past the word, means that everything is fine now or that we can pretend the past didn't happen. There it was. The subtle but real misunderstanding. He shook his head. I don't think that. You don't? She said it like she didn't quite believe him. No, he said. I'm not assuming anything. And I'm not trying to speed things up. I just want us to work together. And for you to feel comfortable, that's all. Her eyes flickered. Uncertainty, vulnerability, fear. He softened further. Deborah, talk to me, please. But that plea was too much, too direct, too intimate. She pulled in a tight breath. We should focus on the festival, she said quietly. He felt the shift, tiny, subtle, but unmistakable. The misunderstanding wasn't about an event. It was about meaning. Deborah believed he was romantically hopeful too quickly. She believed he was expecting more from her. She believed she had to shut it down before either of them got hurt. And that small belief, incorrect but deeply rooted, stung. Not a heartbreak, just an ache. He nodded slowly. Okay, we focus on the festival. She looked down. Thank you. The warmth of last night dissolved into a thin frost of misunderstanding. Not hostility, not anger, just distance. A step backward, and Evergreen felt it. The lantern's light dimmed a shade. A snowflake paused in midair outside before falling heavily. A draft stirred the pages on the desk, whispering like a disappointed breath. But Magic waited, and Magic listened, because misunderstandings were necessary sometimes. To loosen old walls, to reveal old wounds, to open old doors. James stepped back from the table, rolling the sketches carefully. If you need anything, he said quietly, I'm around. Deborah swallowed hard. I know. You can still set the pace, he added. Her eyes softened despite everything. I just don't know the pace yet. That's okay, he said, almost smiling. Neither do I. Then he left the library in quiet Snowlight, leaving Deborah with her hand resting over her pounding heart. The lantern flickered back to life. She ignored it, blinking away the sting in her eyes. It's fine, she whispered to herself. But Evergreen knew the truth. This misunderstanding was the first crack, small but real, that would lead to the breaking point coming in segment 6, when everything they feared would echo loud enough to send James away again. Evening arrived early that day in Evergreen. Winter twilight always had a way of sinking in quietly. One moment soft pearly daylight still clung to rooftops, and then, almost imperceptibly, the sky shifted into deep blues and purples. spreading its velvet curtain across the town. Lanterns glowed warmly along Winterberry Lane. The great evergreen tree shimmered with hints of gold beneath a fresh layer of snow, and the air carried the scent of cinnamon from Nellie's bakery. Winding softly through the cold, Deborah felt the weight of that twilight as she locked up the library. Her misunderstanding with James earlier that day lingered heavily, not sharp enough to be called a fight, not dramatic enough to be a confrontation, but just enough to leave a hollow ache in her chest. She hated that she'd pulled away. She hated that she didn't know how to stop protecting herself. She hated that she could still feel the warmth of last night, lingering like a ghost on her skin. As she stepped onto the library steps, a lantern flickered above the door, its glow warming unexpectedly, a small pulse of encouragement. She crossed her arms. "Not now," she told it. It flickered again, softer this time, and she sighed, stepping into the snow-covered lane. Across town, James paced the workshop floor again, not with anger, not even frustration, with something softer, a kind of sadness mixed with quiet longing. There were still wood shavings on his sweater, sawdust in his hair, and smudges of charcoal on his fingers from sketching a new idea late into the afternoon. A design he wasn't sure he'd ever show anyone, but his thoughts weren't on his work. They wouldn't stay there. They kept circling everything that had gone wrong that morning. He knew Deborah's reaction wasn't intentional. He knew she was scared. He knew the past had carved deeper lines in her heart than he wanted to admit. Still, the distance she'd put up felt like a small, sharp splinter beneath his ribs. He wasn't sure what to do next, wasn't sure how to move forward without pushing. All he knew was that he didn't want to lose this second chance before it even began. A soft knock on the workshop door startled him. He opened it to find Deborah, cheeks pink from the cold, scarf wrapped tight, her breath rising in little clouds. For a moment he just stared, caught between surprise and something else. Relief, maybe. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," he echoed. Can we talk?" she asked, hesitating on the threshold. He stepped aside instantly. "Yeah, of course." She took a tentative step inside, brushing snow from her coat. The workshop greeted her with its warm lamplight, smelling faintly of pine, varnish, and the past, familiar and gentle. James closed the door behind her. Outside, the snowfall thickened. Inside, time slowed. She stood there for a moment, uncertain, small, thoughtful. He waited. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier," she blurted softly. He blinked. "Deborah." "No, let me say it." She lifted a hand, then lowered it, as though trying to gather courage. "I wasn't fair or kind, and it wasn't because of you. It was because of me." He stepped closer, slowly, giving her room. "What do you mean?" She exhaled through her nose, breath trembling. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just panicked. I don't know how to read this. Us. I don't know how to let myself want something again." His chest tightened. He took another small step closer, leaving space but not distance. "You're allowed to be scared," he said gently. Her eyes shone with something unspoken. "So are you." He opened his mouth, then closed it, because she was right, and fear lived in both of them. Fear of repeating history, fear of wanting too much, fear of getting hurt all over again. She wrapped her arms around herself as though trying to contain her own heart. "I don't know how to do this slowly," she said. "I don't know how to not run." James swallowed hard. "You don't have to run, and I'm not asking you to leap. Just walk with me." Her breath hitched, faint but audible. For the first time in years, she let herself meet his gaze fully, without a shield, without a laugh, without a wall. And in that moment, something inside her softened. Not enough to spill, but enough to glow. Enough to push back the cold. He spoke carefully. "Can we try again? Fresh? No pressure, no expectations. Just two people learning to talk again?" She nodded, barely, but it was real. "Okay," she whispered. His relief was so strong it felt physical. They stood in that fragile thaw for a moment, the light around them warming like breath on glass. Then she glanced at a wooden box on his workbench and immediately recognized it. "Is that—" Her voice softened in awe. James followed her gaze. "Yeah. My grandmother's unfinished ornament." Deborah walked toward it slowly, reverently. Snow melted in her hair as she approached the lamplight. She brushed her fingertips over the carved lanterns and snowflakes. So careful, so gentle, that James felt something inside him twist. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You're finishing it." He nodded. "Trying to." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "You always carve with your heart first." Her words hit him like a quiet, tender blow. His breath faltered as he answered, "I want to finish what she started. It feels like a promise." She considered that for a quiet moment. "A promise to who?" He hesitated, and then, softer than snowfall, "I don't know yet." Their breaths mingled in the warm workshop air. Silence wrapped around them like a soft blanket, intimate, safe, quietly charged. Deborah stepped back, fingertip lingering on the edge of the ornament. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being patient, and for not—" "Rushing you?" he offered. She nodded. "I told you," he whispered, "we set the pace together." Something fragile and luminous bloomed between them, and evergreen, watching through the frosted windows, shimmered with soft approval. Snowflakes drifted slower, lanterns glowed warmer. Magic leaned in. A reconciliation, gentle and real, had just begun. But not everyone in Evergreen understood subtlety. As they stepped out onto Winterberry Lane later that evening, walking slower than before, shoulders drifting closer than before, they passed the bakery where two older townsfolk, Mrs. Donnelly and Mr. Hughes, were deep in conversation. Mrs. Donnelly's voice carried far too well in the quiet night. "I'm just saying," she declared, "people like James Rowan always leave again. It's in their bones." Deborah stiffened instantly. James halted mid-step. Mr. Hughes sighed. Now, Dolly." "It's true," Mrs. Donnelly insisted. "He came back last time and left without a word, didn't he? And poor Deborah, she cried for days, that girl. And here he is again, charming her all over. But he'll go back to that city life as soon as something shiny calls him." Deborah's breath froze. Her cheeks drained of color. James felt the words like an open strike to the ribs. He stood there, snow drifting over his shoulders, unable to force himself to move. Mrs. Donnelly continued, oblivious. "Some people don't change, and heartbreak looks the same no matter how many years go by." Mr. Hughes mumbled something about gossip, about being harsh, but the damage was done. Deborah turned slowly toward James. Her eyes were wide, hurt, shaken, defensive. Her old wounds surfacing all at once. Wounds he had put there. "Deborah," he whispered, voice breaking. But she had already stepped back. One step. Two. "I should go," she whispered, voice trembling. He reached out instinctively and then let his hand drop because touching her now would feel like pressing into a bruise. "Deborah, please." "No," she whispered, I need a minute." She turned and hurried down the lane, snow swallowing the sound of her footsteps. James stood there in the falling twilight, breath shaking, heart thudding like winter thunder, feeling something deep inside him crack. Mrs. Donnelly froze when she saw him. "Oh, James, I didn't know you heard." But he didn't hear the rest. He walked away without a word, snow trailing behind him in soft, broken footprints. Evergreen felt it. The lanterns flickered uncertainly. The snow slowed. The town drew in a quiet, uneasy breath. Because this this misunderstanding hurt deeper. And it was only the beginning. Evergreen woke to a pale morning after the misunderstanding, a thin, hesitant kind of dawn where the light seemed unsure of itself, as though the day didn't want to intrude on heartbreak. Snow drifted slowly through the gray air, not in joyful spirals, but in quiet, drifting flakes that looked like thoughts falling from the sky. Deborah felt that heaviness the moment she opened her eyes. She lay in bed for a long while, her blankets pulled up high, staring at the glow of the lantern on her dresser. It pulsed faintly, as if asking gently, "Do you want to talk about it?" She rolled onto her side and whispered, "No," because the truth was too complicated. Because Mrs. Donnelly's words still echoed. Because James's silence afterward hurt in a way she wasn't prepared for. Because the look in his eyes when she stepped away had followed her all night. Because she wanted to believe in him, but belief hurt. The lantern's glow dimmed just slightly like an exhale. She pressed her palm to her forehead. "I shouldn't have walked away," she murmured. "But you also left," she whispered toward the memory of him. You left once before, and now you think you're going to again. Even she flinched at her own honesty. She rose slowly, wrapped herself in a sweater, and made her way to the library below. Mrs. Holbrook wasn't in yet. The building was still and quiet. Deborah set her notebook on her desk and froze, because the sketches James had made for the story corner, the lantern walkway, the benches were missing. At first she thought she'd misplaced them. Then she noticed the small scrap of paper tucked into her notebook like a bookmark. Her breath caught when she recognized his handwriting. Thank you for everything. This is your space. You should arrange it the way you want. I'm sorry if I made anything harder. J. Her chest cinched. It wasn't a goodbye letter, not exactly. But it wasn't nothing. She pressed the note to her chest, breath trembling. James, she whispered. But the library was silent. She turned slowly, as though expecting him to appear from some shadowed aisle the way he used to when they were teenagers. He did not. She checked the time. Too early for him to be outside the bakery, too early to be at the workshop. Still, she bundled into her coat and stepped outside. Winterberry Lane was quiet, snow drifting lazily through the morning air, lanterns glowing low and golden. She hurried down the street, boots crunching softly, breath steaming out in worried puffs. She passed the bakery. She passed the antique shop. She passed the tree in the square, its branches heavy with snow, and something in her chest dropped. The workshop door was closed. Dark. Still. She stepped closer, heart tightening, and pressed her gloved hand to the window. The bench was empty. The tools were organized. The light was off. It looked like a place waiting to be left. She whispered, "No." Then a voice behind her said softly, "You just missed him." Deborah spun. Lila Winthallo stood a few paces away, shawl wrapped around her like twilight, snowflakes caught in her pale hair. Her lantern shop glowed faintly in the distance, though she hadn't opened the door. "Missed him?" Deborah breathed, throat tightening. Lila nodded. "He left early this morning." Deborah's stomach dropped. "Left? Where?" "Back to the city," Lila said gently. "He thought you didn't want him here." Deborah's eyes burned. "I didn't say that. I didn't." "But he believed it," Lila murmured. "People often believe the fear inside themselves more readily than the truth standing right in front of them." Deborah stepped back, shaking her head as though she could undo the past 12 hours by will alone. "He didn't even say goodbye. He didn't think he was allowed to," Lila said softly. "He thought leaving quietly would hurt less." Deborah pressed both hands over her mouth. A quiet, fragile sound escaped her. Not quite a sob, but an ache trying to find its voice. Lila stepped closer, her eyes luminous and kind. "He cared for you more deeply than he knew how to communicate. That kind of care often comes out sideways." Deborah let her hands fall from her face. Her breath shook. Her voice emerged small and broken. "I walked away. I shouldn't have walked away." "You were scared," Lila said. "I'm tired of being scared," Deborah whispered. The lanterns along the lane flickered with sympathy. Lila reached out, resting a cool, light hand on Deborah's arm. "Then stop running from what you want." Deborah's breath caught. What if what I want isn't here anymore? Lila tilted her head. "Oh, child. Love doesn't disappear in a single night." Deborah blinked tears away. "What do I do now?" "Let the day unfold," Lila said. "Sometimes the heart needs to break open before it can choose clearly." Then she stepped back, her shawl shimmering like softly falling dusk. "He'll come back," she whispered. "How do you know?" "I listen to wishes," Lila said simply. "And his is not finished." Before Deborah could speak again, a gust of wind swirled a ring of snowflakes lightly around her boots. And when she looked up, Lila had drifted away into the snowfall. James sat on the city-bound train later that morning, staring at nothing as the world blurred by in streaks of white and gray. His suitcase sat at his feet. His chest felt hollow. He kept replaying last night, the moment outside the bakery. Deborah stepping back from him, hurt filling her eyes, her voice trembling as she said she needed a minute. And the worst part, the part that dug deepest, was that Mrs. Donnelly's words echoed too closely to his own fears. "You'll leave again. You always leave. You hurt her." He hated it. He hated that it wasn't entirely wrong. The intercom announced the next stop. James barely heard it. He tightened his grip on the satchel in his lap and froze. There, slipped between sketchbook pages, was something small and familiar. A pressed paper snowflake, crooked along one edge, flatter than it should be, cut from the library craft table earlier in the week, with faint pencil marks on the back where a child had written, "Miss Deborah says magic is real if you look kindly." His breath caught, chest tightening. He hadn't put it in his bag. She must have tucked it there last night while they worked on Mrs. Donnelly's signs. His heart trembled. He turned the snowflake over. Trace the pencil marks. Trace the uneven cuts. Deborah had helped Hazel cut this one. He remembered her smiling when the girl held it up proudly. She had placed it in his sketchbook. Nothing accidental, nothing meaningless. A small kindness. A fragment of the day they had shared. Emotion rose in him like warmth through snow. He closed his eyes. He could still hear her voice in the workshop. The soft, quiet way she'd said, "Okay." The tremor in her breath when she admitted she was scared. The softness she let him see. The way she touched the ornament, her fingertips reverent. He swallowed hard, the realization rising inside him like sunrise. She didn't stop caring. She was just afraid. And I left anyway. I left again. He opened his eyes. The world outside looked harsher now, the snow here colder, the light sharper. He breathed in slowly and exhaled a truth that had taken him years to understand. I love her. The words were soft, smaller than his heartbeat, but saying them made them real and undeniable and impossible to abandon. He stood abruptly. The businessman next to him blinked. The doors aren't open yet." James didn't care. He was getting off at the next station and turning around. Immediately. He didn't care if the trains ran late, or the snow fell thick, or if Evergreen shook its head at him. He was going back. Back to the town that tugged at him with a quiet kind of magic. Back to the workshop that held the shape of his unfinished life. Back to the woman whose absence felt like winter without warmth. He pressed the paper snowflake to his chest. "I'm coming home," he whispered. Meanwhile, back in Evergreen, Deborah stood in the lane outside the workshop, fingers curled around James's note, snow landing lightly on her lashes. She knew now, with painful clarity, that the misunderstanding hadn't been truth. It had been fear echoing fear. She'd walked away. He had heard only the hurt. And then he had walked away too, quietly, believing he was doing the kind thing. She pressed the note to her heart and whispered, "Come back." The lantern above the workshop door glowed brighter. This is as if answering the plea. Hours later, after 2 train transfers and a near sprint through a station hallway, James finally stepped onto the Evergreen-bound train. His pulse pounded. His chest buzzed with adrenaline and longing and a tremor of magic he refused to deny now. He sat by the window and watched the city fade behind him. Every mile felt like shedding old skin. Every snow-covered field felt like opening his heart a little more. The paper snowflake lay on the seat beside him. He touched it gently, reverently. "I'm coming back to you," he whispered. The train curved around the hills, lantern-lit small towns passing by in the dusk, and when Evergreen finally appeared in the distance, a warm constellation of golden lights beneath a deepening blue sky, his breath stilled. Home. He stepped off the train into falling snow, the cold biting his cheeks. He didn't wait for breath to settle. He didn't stop to brush off the snow. He just began walking fast toward Winterberry Lane. Back toward her. Back toward everything. Deborah sat on her bed upstairs in the library, the lantern glowing warm beside her, the note clutched in her hand. She closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered through the ache. "Please come back." Her breath trembled in the quiet. Snow fell thicker. Lanterns flickered. The town hummed with anticipation. And somewhere out there, steps crunching through fresh snow, breath fogging in the cold air. James Rowan was walking back into her story. Segment 8 would bring them together at last. But for now, Evergreen held its breath. The reunion was close. The magic was rising. And both of their hearts were finally facing the same direction. Evergreen never hurried. not even on Christmas morning. Snow had fallen softly through the night, layering rooftops in gentle white curves, smoothing out footprints, covering fences like icing on gingerbread houses. Dawn slid over the town in shades of pink and pale gold, turning every window into a soft lantern. Deborah stood at her window above the library watching the slow rise of Christmas Day. Her breath fogged the glass. Her fingertips pressed lightly against it, and her eyes scanned the quiet street below with a longing she didn't dare speak aloud. Come back, she thought. Please come back. She felt the hollow absence of him everywhere, in the empty workshop window, in the quiet morning air, in the way her heart beat too loud in the stillness. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders. She tried to sleep. She'd failed. Her chest was too full of a feeling she couldn't categorize. Something between hope and regret and a fragile sliver of courage. The lantern Lila had given her glowed faintly on the desk, warm and listening. I miss him, she whispered quietly to the lantern. It brightened in reply, soft, golden, undeniable. Deborah closed her eyes. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of loving too much, afraid of losing too deeply, afraid of repeating heartbreak. She opened her eyes again. Not today, she whispered. Today I'm done being afraid. Down the lane, the church bells began to chime. It was time for the town to gather for the Christmas festival. Deborah inhaled slowly, then stepped downstairs, out into the crisp morning air. James arrived in Evergreen just before sunrise. The train hissed to a final stop, and he stepped onto the platform with breathless urgency, heart pounding like winter thunder in his chest. Snow swirled around him, slow, drifting, magical, as though welcoming him home. He didn't pause. He didn't steady himself. He didn't question the pounding truth in his chest. He simply began to run. Boots kicking up powder, breath misting in frantic bursts, snow catching in his hair and lashes. Evergreen blurred around him, lampposts, wreaths, houses. But he didn't slow, not even when his lungs burned. Please, he thought, chest tight, throat raw. Don't let me be too late. He reached Winterberry Lane, stumbling slightly on the turn. The bakery glowed. The antique shop glittered with tiny lights. Families emerged from houses, bundled in coats, children laughing. He scanned the crowds, heart wild, searching for dark hair, a deep green coat, the shape of her presence. He didn't see her. His heart squeezed painfully. Then a voice reached him over the hushed Christmas morning air. James? He spun, and there she was, standing beneath the canopy of falling snow, wrapped in her winter coat, cheeks pink from the cold, breath fogging gently in the air. She looked like winter's quiet dream, fragile and hopeful, luminous and real. And her eyes, those warm hazel eyes flecked with gold, widened in shock, and something deeper the moment they met his. He couldn't move at first. Neither could she. Snow drifted softly between them, catching in the hush like suspended stars. Finally, she whispered, "You came back." He stepped toward her, breath breaking. "I never should have left." Emotion cracked across her face, raw and real. I thought you didn't want. They both stopped, chests rising and falling, realizing at the same moment how fear had tangled their truths. He reached her then, close, but not touching. Snow settling on their shoulders like blessings. "Deborah," he breathed, voice trembling. "I left because I thought you didn't want me here. I thought I hurt you, and that walking away again would spare you. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Her breath shook. "I walked away because I was scared, because I didn't know how to believe you wouldn't leave again, and then you did." He closed his eyes, pained. "I know. I broke something I didn't know how to fix." She swallowed hard. "But you came back." He opened his eyes, meeting hers fully. "I came back because I realized something," he whispered, "that no matter how long I was gone, no matter how confused I got, every road still pointed here." His voice cracked. "To you." A small quiet sound escaped her, a breath, a sob, an exhale of relief. James stepped closer. One slow step, then another. He reached out, hesitating just before touching her. "I don't want the city," he said softly. "I don't want that life if you're not in it." His voice trembled. "I'm tired of running away from the people who feel like home." Her eyes shimmered. "You left because you were hurting," she whispered, "and I forgave you long before I admitted it." Snowflakes settled in her hair like tiny stars. He reached up, gently, slowly, and touched her cheek with the back of his knuckles. She leaned into it, breath trembling. "I shouldn't have walked away," she whispered. "I should have talked to you. I should have." He shook his head softly. "We were both scared." A tear slipped from her lash, freezing slightly in the cold. James brushed it with his thumb. She closed her eyes. Silence held them tenderly, wrapped them in winter's hush, bound them in something older and deeper than words. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to be scared anymore. Not with you." His breath broke. "Then don't be," he murmured. "We can do this. We can take it slow. We can figure it out. Together. If you'll have me." She opened her eyes and met his fully, openly, for the first time since they were young. And the truth inside her glowed, warm and sure. "I want this," she whispered. "I want us." His chest tightened with relief, so powerful it hurt. "Deborah," he breathed. She stepped closer, their coats brushing. Snow swirled around them like magic waking. The lantern above them glowed brighter. The great evergreen in the square shimmered with anticipation. And then, in the quiet of Christmas morning, she slid her hand into his. Warm, uncertain, soft, real. He closed his fingers around hers, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd held for years. Later that evening, Evergreen gathered in the town square. Children ran through the snow in bright scarves. Neighbors greeted one another with warm embraces. Lanterns lined the walkways in arcs of gold and amber light. The air smelled of cocoa and cinnamon and pine, and the great evergreen tree towered above the center of the square, its branches heavy with ornaments, glowing softly, patiently. James stood beside Deborah near the tree's base, their hands brushing, hearts aligned in a quiet, new rhythm. Lila Winthallow drifted through the crowd like a breeze of twilight, smiling knowingly, and she saw them. "You found your way," she murmured. "We're trying," Deborah said. "That is all love ever needs," Lila replied, her lantern pulsing once in warm approval. The crowd hushed. Marcus Pinewell stood dramatically on a small platform, one foot nearly slipping on a patch of ice as he raised his hands. "People of Evergreen," he cried with earnest enthusiasm, "tonight we do not simply light a tree. We light our hopes, our hearts, our stories, and the magic of this town, which always brings us home." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. "And this year," Marcus continued, "our tree has been decorated with a very special ornament." Deborah turned, startled. James smiled softly and squeezed her hand. "Go ahead," he whispered. "Hang it." Her breath caught. He pulled from his coat pocket the ornament he'd finished earlier that day, the one that had waited years. Tiny carved lanterns twined with snowflakes. A circle completed with a small, asymmetrical snowflake at the top. Imperfect but beautiful. And engraved gently at the bottom, "For the wish we share." Deborah's eyes filled instantly. "James?" He brushed her cheek with his thumb. "It was always meant to be ours." Her heart swelled so full it felt hard to contain. She stepped forward, trembling but sure, and lifted the ornament to a low branch. Snowlight caught the carved lanterns and made them glow like tiny stars. The moment her fingers left it, the ornament flickered. Softly at first, then brighter, and the magic of evergreen shimmered all around the tree. Marcus took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1. The tree burst into light. Golden, warm, radiant. The crowd gasped with joy. Snow swirled upward in gentle spirals, catching the glow and scattering it like shimmering confetti. Children laughed. Lanterns brightened. The air filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. James turned to Deborah, eyes shining in the tree's glow. "Deborah Lindale," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and every winter after." Her breath trembled. "Then choose me," she whispered, "and stay." He leaned in, not rushed, not urgent, and rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing in the soft glow of the Christmas tree, hearts pressed close in the quiet. "I'm home," he murmured. With you. Her eyes drifted shut. Snow fell around them like blessings. The lanterns gleamed softly. Evergreen hummed in warm satisfaction, and beneath the shimmering Christmas tree, illuminated in golden light and shared breath, James and Deborah sealed their new beginning with a tender, lingering kiss, gentle enough for sleep, deep enough for story, warm enough to last winter after winter. The town cheered softly around them. Magic settled like a sigh. An evergreen, wrapped in its lantern-lit snowfall, whispered its final benediction. This is love. This is home. This is Christmas.